Welcome to Beyond the Covers. I'm Chris Horner. In today's edition, I want to cover Primož Roglič because we're less than 1 week out of the Tour de France. He's one of the big four favorites. And I want to cover the obstacles that Primož Roglič has to overcome in order to win this year's 24 Tour de France, or at least be sharper and have to clean up the obstacles. I have at least 6 obstacles that the Slovenian rider for Bora Hansgrohe has to be able to clean up in order to win the 24 edition. Now, there's always 2 extra obstacles that every rider trying to win the Tour de France, or any Grand Tour for that matter, have to overcome. They have to come in healthy. They have to come in on something near their best form. It has to arrive throughout a Grand Tour at some moment. If you're going to win that Grand Tour, you have to be healthy. You have to have your top form at some moment. It doesn't have to be perfect throughout the first week, but it's got to get there at some moment in the Tour de France in order to win it. Now, Primož Roglič, outside of those 2 obstacles, like all the riders have to overcome, he has at least 6 obstacles. The first one, it's very obvious. He has to avoid crashes. We've seen Primož Roglič lose 2 chances at winning 2 Tour de France's in 2021 and 2022, where we saw Primož Roglič crash hard early in the first week of both those Tour de France's and Tours de France, and we know that if he crashes hard, there's a good chance that he's not going to finish this year's 24 Tour de France. So the first obstacle is everything, and the most important for Primož Roglič is don't crash yourself throughout the Tour de France. Now, we can look at some of his crashes and say they're not exactly his fault, for sure. Crashes happen all the time. I am not blaming Primož Roglič for all his crashes. But if we go into the Vuelta a España 2 years ago, and he's coming up to a summit finish after dropping Remco Evenepoel, he has Mads Pedersen there. He moves straight over to the right side. He comes back and hits the hip there of Fred Wright and crashes himself. Those are the kind of crashes that he has to avoid. The ones that he's causing himself. The ones that you can easily see sitting on your Chesterfield that Primož Roglič took himself down on this crash. You have to be able to eliminate that obstacle if you're going to win the Tour de France and you're Primož Roglič. Now, next up is going to be bad moments in the race that we've seen Primož Roglič have. If I take you back to last year's Giro d'Italia, he had bad moments when he's going up to the top of some of those climbs where his American teammate Sepp Kuss, then from Jumbo-Visma, had to save him and do damage control up to Almeida and Geraint Thomas in order to keep Primož Roglič close on the general classification. Those kind of moments he has to be able to overcome and have less of those, and they can't be as dramatic, because when we start looking at the next obstacle that Primož Roglič has to overcome, it's his team, Bora Hansgrohe. And no one on his team there, of that whole 7 roster of riders that's backing up Primož Roglič, to give you 8 riders total, none of those 7 riders have shown that they've been able to go deep into a Tour de France last climb of a stage, a big mountain stage. And if Primož Roglič has a bad moment, none of those riders have shown that they will be capable of being there for Primož Roglič. And if I take you back to Dauphiné Stage 8, when Primož Roglič was having a bad moment in his last race before this year's 24 edition of the Tour de France starts, Primož Roglič needed a teammate on that stage. Luckily, he had Ciccone there from Lidl-Trek that helped him a couple times pulling throughout that final climb, and that saved the 8 seconds that won him the Dauphiné before this year's Tour de France. But when we look at his teammates, Vlasov has not shown that he's been able to go multiple stages deep into a Tour de France and be left with 3, 4, 5 riders left at the front group. And remember, 4 riders are Jonas, Primož, Tadej, and Remco Evenepoel. So Vlasov has to be able to stay with at least 5, and we have not seen that out of Vlasov or even Jai Hindley, the Giro d'Italia winner in previous years. We have not seen him stay at the Tour de France. You'll say, Chris, he won a stage at last year's Tour de France. Jai Hindley did win a stage, but he was up the road in a breakaway, tactically got away from the riders going in that break, won that stage, and didn't have to compete against Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar when he won that stage 5 of last year's Tour de France. We still have not seen him go deep into the Tour de France, even though he's a Giro d'Italia winner. Now, the next obstacle, Sepp Kuss, the American rider. He is not on the team for Primož Roglič. And every one of Primož Roglic's Grand Tour victories, he has 4 of them, every one of them, Sepp Kuss was there to help Primož Roglič and do damage control whenever he had bad moments. They kind of overlap, right? All 6 of the obstacles that Primož Roglič has to overcome, they mostly almost somehow overlap with each other, and Sepp Kuss is one of those obstacles that he's given up by leaving Visma Lease bike and going over the Bora Hansgrohe, because if we look at last year's Giro, like I told you, when he had a bad moment, Sepp Kuss had to save him. When we go back to his Vuelta a España's victory in 2020 while going up the Angliru, when he was getting dropped from Hugh Carthy, who finished 3rd on the general classification that year's Vuelta a España, Hugh Carthy went on to win that stage, and Primož Roglič had a bad moment, dropped. It was Sepp Kuss that saved him on the Angliru, did damage control, so Primož Roglič can go on later to win the Vuelta a España. Now, the next obstacle for Primož Roglič that I have on my list, it has to be TTs. This year's Tour de France has 2 time trials in it, and when we go back again and look at the 4 Grand Tour victories from 2019, 2020, 2021, all 3 Vuelta a España victories, and his Giro last year, each one of those Grand Tours, he had an individual time trial victory in. In fact, if we look a little bit closer, 2019, the only stage win he had was an individual time trial. And 2023, Giro d'Italia, the only stage win that Primož Roglič had was the individual time trial when his form finally came back to 100% fitness on the penultimate stage. And he beat Geraint Thomas going up the individual time trial to take the pink jersey at the end of last year's Giro d'Italia. But this year's Tour de France, we have 2 individual time trials, like I told you, but the big difference between his 4 last Grand Tour victories, we look at this year's Tour de France, when he's going against a competition like Jonas Vingegaard, who won a remarkable individual time trial ride last year in the 23 edition of the Tour when he went on to win, Tadej Pogačar. Let me remind you guys, 2020, he won the individual time trial against Primož Roglič in that year's edition to dislodge this other Slovenian out and put him into 2nd on GC. So we know those 2 guys can time trial. And Remco Evenepoel, when he won the Vuelta a España, well, he won the individual time trial there, and Primož Roglič didn't. So when we started going back to the Tour de France with only 2 individual time trials, only 2, that's quite a bit, stage 7 and the last stage at 21, Primož Roglič most likely needs to win an individual time trial. If we're going to look at the statistical history of the Slovenian winning Grand Tours, he needs at least stage 7 or stage 21. Can you imagine if we come all the way into stage 20 and Primož Roglič is wearing the race leader's yellow jersey, it's tied on the general classification, and we go into that individual time trial in Nice going up Col d'Ez, and we have the other Slovenian, Tadej Pogačar, still behind him within a few seconds, or Jonas Vingegaard, or Remco Evenepoel. It's going to be looking back at the 2021 Tour de France all over again, and the pressure is going to be massive for Primož Roglič to win that individual time trial on the last day in Nice if he is to win the Tour de France. Huge obstacles right now for this year's edition of the Tour de France for Primož Roglič in order to win. And there's even one more I want to talk about. The 6th is the tactical ability of Primož Roglič. We saw last year in 2023 when Primož Roglič won, starting at the beginning of the season in Trino Adriatico, tactically he was perfect there. He stayed on the wheels, he raced it good. I didn't like some of the stages when Wout van Aert was attacking and blowing up his teammates, but Primož Roglič always stayed with the GC favorites and won multiple stages to win Trino Adriatico and the general classification. Later, shortly after that, at Catalonia last season in 23, he won against Remco Evenepoel after tactically always following the Belgian kid and riding it intelligently to win more or less on time bonuses over Remco Evenepoel at the Vuelta a Catalonia. Then he went into the Giro d'Italia, raced it tactically smart, had bad moments at the Giro d'Italia, but had Sepp Kuss back there to save the day, as I told you earlier in the video. We go further into the season last year, he raced tactically incredibly smart as we went all the way into the Vuelta a España, where realistically the only tactical mistake he made, which isn't a tactical mistake if you want to try to win the Vuelta a España, but it is a team mistake. And I don't believe you ever attack your teammates when we have Sepp Kuss wearing the race leader's red jersey at the Vuelta a España. I didn't like that tactic, but if you want to win, that is the correct tactic to do. So Primož Roglič tactically was pretty smart through 2023, but history has shown in the past that Primož Roglič tactically makes a ton of mistakes, and I'll take you back to the Giro d'Italia when we're talking about 2019, where he was racing against Vincenzo Nibali. Those two neutralize each other out. Carapaz went up the road, won that year's edition of the Giro d'Italia, and Primož Roglič finished third on the general classification because tactically he put himself in a position where Vincenzo Nibali and him wouldn't work, and that allowed Carapaz to go up the road. Now you would think, well, how's that work coming up to the 24 Tour de France? Well, remember, there's 4 big-time favorites. At that year's Giro d'Italia, there was only 2, Vincenzo Nibali and Primož Roglič. Tactically, it might not even have been a bad move to make Vincenzo Nibali do some work, but tactically it allowed Carapaz to go up the road. This year, in the 2024 edition, with 4 favorites up there, you got to believe if Primož Roglič gets in a position, he may not work with the other riders there. Much like we have saw Jonas Vingegaard do when Tadej Pogačar was attacking him. Jonas Vingegaard tactically would sit on Tadej Pogačar, but tactically that was the correct move to do because the Slovenian Tadej Pogačar was always going to take points away. So will we see some kind of tactic out of Primož Roglič when we get into the 24 edition of the Tour de France with 4 favorites up there? We could easily see 2 or 3 of the favorites neutralize each other out on stage 1. Let Jonas Vingegaard come back to the group. His form starts getting better and better after stage 1, and maybe Jonas Vingegaard goes on to win the Tour de France just because of tactical mistakes from the other 3. If I compare all 4 riders and how they race, how intelligent they are racing tactically, well, 3 of the riders, we know Remco Evenepoel last year at the Vuelta a España, he let Sepp Kuss go up the road and gain a ton of time, who won that year's Vuelta a España. We know that the Giro from 2019, the story I just told you with Vincenzo Nibali and Primož Roglič, and many times since and after that point with Primož Roglič has made tactical mistakes. We know Tadej Pogačar has made a ton of tactical mistakes, and I can just take you back to Jonas Vingegaard's first Tour de France win in 2022 up Col de Grenade on stage 11, where Tadej Pogačar, made a ton of mistakes, and his teammates made a ton of mistakes, and then Jonas Vingegaard went on to win that year's Tour de France. So when I look at the 4 riders, Jonas Vingegaard is the only one that I believe races incredibly tactically smart as an individual. I have never liked Visma Lease Bike's tactics or Jumbo-Visma in the past, their past sponsor name. I have never liked their tactics as a team, but Jonas Vingegaard, with the exception of last year's 23 Vuelta a España when he's attacking his teammate, which again, as I already pointed out with Primož Roglič, if you want to win the Vuelta a España, it's not a bad tactic. It is a terrible nightmare scenario to do to be attacking your teammate in a race that's wearing the race leader's yellow jersey like Primož Roglič and Jonas Vingegaard did. I did not like that, but tactically it wasn't a bad move if you want to win the Vuelta a España. I can't argue with that. So Jonas Vingegaard has been something close to about flawless that I have seen out of the rider there from Visma Lease Bike throughout his racing. And let me point out, of all the 6 problems that Primož Roglič has to overcome to win the Tour de France, Jonas Vingegaard has not had a bad moment during a Grand Tour. He has always been steady. You'll say, well, he had bad moments when Tadej Pogačar beat him on a couple stages last year. They weren't bad moments. Tadej Pogačar was just a little bit better. Jonas Vingegaard never dropped his form, never blew up, never just lost minutes, never had to drop back and fall back and get help from a teammate like we saw Primož Roglič do at the Giro with Sepp Kuss. Jonas Vingegaard has never had bad moments, and Jonas Vingegaard, as a rider, individually, I believe has tactically been the best of the 4 riders and almost spot on as an individual rider. I wouldn't allow my teammates to do what his director sportifs was telling his teammates to do to him during the last 2 Tour de France's. But that being said, Jonas Vingegaard racing as an individual, he has been the best of the 4 riders up there. So when we look at Primož Roglic's list that he has to overcome, those 6 big hurdles, at least 2 or 3 of them, Jonas doesn't have to learn anything tactically racing individually if he gets up there against the others. And he certainly does not have bad moments in Grand Tours at the Tour de France. He is always steady and reliable at every day, at every stage of the race. I can bring you back to Tadej Pogačar on that stage 11 again. Tactically bad, bad moments bad. And I can bring you into, of course, Mont Ventoux, the stage that Wout van Aert won, where Jumbo-Visma's Jonas Vingegaard dropped Tadej Pogačar and he had a bad moment. Luckily for him, he had some help going down the descent from Carapaz back there helping the chase. But of the 4 riders, Jonas Vingegaard has the least of stuff that he has to sharpen up in his tool chest to get ready for this year's Tour de France. But of the 4 riders, Jonas Vingegaard is the one who crashed the hardest on stage 4 of the Basque Country, so he might still have the most to overcome, but it might just be one obstacle. Those first 2 have coming in healthy and 100% on form. Hope you guys liked today's take. Primož Roglič has a lot to overcome to win the Tour de France, but he is one of the big favorites. And if anyone can do it, that Slovenian can win this year's Tour de France. I have no doubt about it. With 4 favorites up there, he's one of the top 3 out of the 4. Look forward to watching this year's Tour de France. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys on the next edition real soon.